Hello and welcome back to Business 101. I am your course instructor Heather Hines. Today we will be talking about Chapter 9, Production Operations Management. So let's first take a look at our learning objectives. After this video, I really encourage you, and I hope that you have been doing this already, is that you're going back, looking at the learning objectives and kind of testing yourself to make sure that you understand each of these objectives. For example, on number 4, you might be asking yourself, why might I have a facility location close to suppliers versus farther away? What about facility layout? What are the different types of facility layouts and when might I use them? What is just-in-time inventory control and when might I really want to use it? And what type of quality controls are there? So I really encourage you guys to be quizzing yourself at the end of each lecture using these learning objectives to make sure you understood everything. Manufacturing in the U.S. So manufacturing and production are kind of synonymous in the business world. Remember in Chapter 1 we learned about the 4 eras of business, how we went from agriculture based because we needed a lot of farmers to feed everybody. And then as technology increased, we went to manufacturing. And then as it increased some more, we had more people available to provide customer service. And then we have started to shift into IT. So as the 4 eras of business have kind of evolved here in the United States, so has manufacturing in the U.S. So we have seen a lot of decline in certain sectors, but we have also seen some growth in others. And we'll see where we've seen growth in just a few slides. For a long time, the U.S. was definitely the leader in manufacturing because we led the world in productivity, and we kind of set the gold standard for how production should operate and to cultivate really good workers and effective processes. And so we'll see that in just a little bit. And a lot of the world kind of watches the United States in terms of manufacturing and tries to emulate or copy their processes. So again, the U.S. economy is no longer manufacturing based. Remember, 85% of our jobs are now in the service sector. A lot of the top paying jobs, in fact, are in the service sector. Legal, your accountant, management consulting. So if you're in college right now and you're thinking about what career path should I choose, well, maybe think of something in the service sector. What kind of things are made here in the U.S.? Well, number 1 is pharmaceuticals. I would dare to say that this last year in 2020, as we searched for the cure for COVID, or at least a vaccine, pharmaceutical companies really shot through the roof. But they have been a big contender in our economy for quite some time. What else do we make? Well, we make planes, cars, and trains, just like Lockheed over here in Palmdale. That would be transportation equipment. We make processed foods, beverages, and tobacco. Those are your consumable goods that you eat, and computer electronics. And remember, this isn't, you would think, what about Facebook? Well, this is in manufactured goods, okay? So again, manufactured goods. So those are, your PCs, your microchips, things like that. Now, what the heck is production? What is production management and what is operation management? Well, production is the creation of goods using those 5 factors of production that we learned in Chapter 1, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and knowledge. Production management is where kind of an old style focus where the focus was on cost. So remember during the manufacturing era, we believed that people will buy it as long as you can produce it. So what did we do? We kind of focused on cost. So if you could sell an item for $100, then you wanted to maximize profit. You wanted to keep costs as low as possible. So that was the main focus. You would hear buzz terms like economies of scale, kind of like when you shop at Costco. If you buy 40 rolls of toilet paper at Costco, your per unit cost is lower than if you go somewhere else and you only buy 8 rolls of toilet paper. But as competition increased and technology increased, then you had people that wanted and expected more. So Hence came the rise of operations management, where instead of the focus being just on cost, they now started to think about the customer and thought about things like inventory management, quality control, production scheduling, and some follow-up services. When you purchase a car, you expect to not just get a good product, but you want to make sure, hey, it has some quality control. The brakes are not going to go out on me. You expect that maybe there's some type of warranty attached, and that if you don't know how to use some part of your car, you can call customer service. And so those are the things that go into operations management. In Chapter 7, we introduce the 4 functions of management: planning, leading, organizing, and controlling. In this chapter, we're going to touch all 4 of those. All right, so Chapters 7 through 11 basically you center around the 4 functions of management. So make sure that you understand each of these 4 functions of management. That's why in Chapter 7, you had one critical thinking question that asked you to explain what those 4 functions were, because they're not going away. You need to understand these. So if you don't, then maybe put a little star next to this slide so you understand that planning, leading, organizing, and controlling. All right, what is the production process? Well, that's when you take your 5 inputs, either land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, or knowledge, or a combination of them. You produce them, and then to get your output, which is goods, services, and even ideas. What is production? When you produce something, you're creating something called form utility. That's where you are adding value by making changes to a product. Otherwise, why would anybody buy your product unless you're providing some type of value? When you're adding value, there's 2 types of production processes. There's the process manufacturing, where you're physically changing something. Kind of if you're a carpenter, you take a block of wood and you make it into a table. Or you're chemically changing materials. Maybe you're a baker and you take eggs, flour, and sugar, and you chemically change that into a cupcake. Or there's the assembly process, where you're just putting things together. That's kind of like your IKEA furniture. You're putting things together. You're just assembling things together for people. Both of these production processes can either be continuous or intermittent. There's other types as well, but these are the 2 main types for this chapter. Continuous is just like it sounds. You have an assembly line, and you turn it on at the beginning of the day, and you basically don't turn it off until the end of the day. No stops. You're just continually producing something, and that's good for mass production, and usually good for things that are really simple, like water bottles, or if you're making soda, right? Then there is something called intermittent process or batch processing. You're making things in small batches. Maybe you have a product and you want to make slight customized changes to them. So that would be intermittent or batch processing. For example, Nike, they might have their one standard shoe, but they want to change the different types of coloring on the shoe. So they might say, hey, I'm going to make a batch of white ones. And then pause and stop, change the machinery a little bit to make ones that have red and black as well as the white. So that would be batch processing. And that allows me to make differentiated products. I mentioned earlier that the United States has kind of set the gold standard for the world for productivity, and here are some of the things that can increase productivity. Critical thinking number 3 gives you a scenario of a toy company that is definitely struggling, and we need to come up with some solutions or some suggestions for that toy company to increase productivity or increase their customer base. So you might want to use some of these ideas to help to kind of give them some suggestions on how to increase productivity and or profit. All right. So we have computer-aided design, CAD, or computer-aided manufacturing, CAM. That's basically when you just use technology or computers to help you with the design or manufacturing of your product. Computer-integrated manufacturing takes that definitely a step above, where you have, like in this picture right here, you have machines putting together your cart instead of people. Now those machines are very, very expensive, so that's one of the drawbacks. But they do tend to decrease errors, and you don't have to pay them health insurance and all those other things. What else do we have? We have flexible manufacturing, where you can have a machine that does multiple tasks. They can produce a variety of products. So instead of having one machine just being able to put on tires, you might have that machine be able to put on tires and also put in the windshield, okay, depending on what task you needed done at that time. Lean manufacturing, that's where you're using the least factors of production as possible, right? So you're looking at your process and saying, okay, is there something that we can cut out of this to make it more lean or use less factors of production? Mass customization, that's where you're tailoring products to meet the needs of a large number of individuals. For example, M&Ms, you can actually order M&Ms that have your name or say some type of custom phrase on it. So that's mass customization because they create the M&Ms, a bunch of them, but then they can also customize it to the unique needs of each customer. Grove's basic production requirements. So this guy was basically, Andrew Grove was the CEO of Intel, and he basically pioneered microchip growth. And he was a guru in terms of business, and he came up with 3 basic requirements. He said, you know what, yes, we need to focus on cost, but that shouldn't be the only thing that we focus on. We should focus on getting customer satisfaction. So maybe make sure that the delivery time is timely and where the customer isn't waiting forever for the product. And we want to provide good quality. Well, actually, no, not good quality, acceptable quality. So notice how he did say acceptable quality. So that doesn't mean the best quality or super high quality. It means acceptable quality for whatever your customer is paying. So we just talked about productions management. Now let's shift over to operations management, which kind of takes production management in a step above. Our operations management, one of the things that they might think about is facility location, facility layout, inventory management, purchasing, quality control, production scheduling, and follow-up services. And we'll talk about each of these in turn. All right, so let's first talk about facility layouts. The first one is assembly line layout, and there are more than just the ones that are in your textbook, but these are the basic ones. Assembly line layout is basically, you think of the old I Love Lucy or a car assembly line, where the cars or the products is going down the line and workers are working on it as it goes down the line. Then there's the modular layout that is for items that are a little bit more complex, whereas assembly line is for things that are very simple. So assembly line layout might be used for something that's kind of a little bit more simple, and you might have continuous production, whereas modular layout is for more complex units. You might have teams of specialized workers working on a product in one area, and then the product shifts into each of the different areas of your layout. And you're usually creating things in small batches, typically in modular layout, versus an assembly line layout that lends itself more towards continuous production. Then in fixed position layout, that's when you might be building something that's really large, like a building, and the workers have to kind of come to that building in order to work on it because it's not easy to move once it's built. Process layout is usually used by hospitals and banks and other manufacturing companies. And so, for example, you might have, instead of grouping the specialized people, you might be grouping the specialized equipment that you might be using for your products. And this is used more for custom products, and it's can also be used for intermittent batch production. So those are the 4 basic types of layouts. Let's next look at inventory management. In inventory management, you'll hear buzzwords like materials requirement planning, or MRP, and ERP. Materials requirement planning is kind of what most manufacturing companies used to use, and some of them still do. This is a computer-based operations management system that allows you to make sure that you have the right parts. Project, okay, here's our sales, so we're going to need X number of parts in this quarter, and maybe we need to order less parts because sales are going to dip in the next quarter, and make sure that you have all the materials that you need. Then there is ERP, which is kind of like a step above MRP, where it it allows you to integrate and talk to other software systems. And so instead of having a standalone MRP system where you're forecasting and you're feeding it data manually, in ERP, the data is coming from your other software systems. So you might have your point of sale systems, which are, your cash registers at different sites, at your different stores, and those POS systems are sending in data saying, hey, we just sold 5 units here, we just sold 2 units here, and it's collecting all of this data, and in real time it's saying, okay, we need this amount of materials. Part of inventory control, and this might be something that you suggest to help this struggling company, is just-in-time inventory control, which is exactly like it sounds. It says, hey, instead of having a bunch of product just sitting on our shelves and taking up space, when you have that, then you need a warehouse, and that costs money to store it and overhead. Instead of doing that, why don't we get our things just in time so that we can get our product, we don't have to store it, maybe do our manufacturing and then send it out. But in order to do just in time, you need to have a really good MRP or ERP system. Purchasing, there's more that goes into purchasing, but for this chapter and for this class, all you need to know is that when you're purchasing, you're looking for some good high quality materials at a good price from good suppliers that you can develop a good relationship with. Quality control. When we think of quality control, we think of these 3 different main types of certifications, and these are kind of like little certifications, these are certifications that companies can obtain to kind of show other companies that they work with, hey, we are really on our game, look, we are Six Sigma quality certified, we have, we're ISO 9000 certified. All right, so what's Six Sigma? That's where you're saying, hey, we are so good that we have very few defects per million. Look at this, 99.99966 defect free. That's pretty high. These other 2 are more world recognized certifications that just say, hey, we have good practices and we think about the environment. Or this other one which says that we have quality management and assurance standards. So again, these are 3 highly recognized certifications within the business world that shows other businesses that they work with, or even customers, that they are really on it. They're doing a good job in terms of not having defects, as in terms of management and assurance standards, or in their impact towards the environment. When we talk about production scheduling, we talk about 2 main types of charts, the PERT chart and the Gantt chart. The PERT chart is usually used at the beginning when you're looking at production scheduling, and that helps you to kind of see the overall broad picture. You might have your production manager kind of sit down and say, okay, so what are identified the dependencies? Okay, so we have to, before we set materials purchase, we have to have the set designed, for example, and it allows you to kind of estimate, okay, how many weeks it's going to take for each item, and then how long the overall plan is going to take. Right, and when you're looking at your plan, you also need to identify your critical path. Now, your critical path isn't the most important piece of it. What your critical path is the part that is going to take you the longest. So, for example, if we go along this path here, where they diverge, this one is 3 weeks plus 1 week, that's 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 9 weeks. Versus here, it's 4 weeks plus 2, that's 6, plus 6, that's 12, plus 1 is 13. So this path right here, the one in purple, is the one that's going to take us the longest. So we might want to get a head start on that first, and we can kind of ignore these other ones for a little while and kind of put them on the back burner. Now, once you develop your PERT chart and you know how long things are going to take and you know where your dependencies are and what your critical path is, then you can develop something called the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart is it's kind of the gold standard when you're talking about product management, production management, and it's the most widely used by far planning tool. And it allows you, while you're working on your project, to kind of see and visualize what have we done, what have we not done, where are our dependencies. So, for example, here we realize that these machine A and B can work in parallel, whereas machine C and D, they cannot. You can do either machine C, and then you would have to go to machine D, and here we have a dependency because one clearly stops when the other begins. So if you see one stop and another one begin, then that means that there's a dependency. Versus if you see things that are going at the same time, then you say those can be done in parallel, and we don't have to wait for the previous item in order to complete that. So hopefully this lecture was very helpful in understanding Chapter 9 and the difference between production and operations management. Have a good day.